Joining me now live is Curtly Wallace from the Institute of Public Affairs and Ben Oquist from the Australia Institute. Good afternoon to you both. Great to see you. Let's get straight into it. I want to begin with vaccine rollout issues. Phase 1B is scheduled to start from tomorrow. Ben, we've had a situation this week where doctors say that they've been swamped with inquiries when the booking system went live. Some have even said that the government has given people unrealistic expectations about whether or not they will be vaccinated this week. Was this inevitable with a rollout of this size, or should it have been handled better?
Well, there is a sentiment that potentially the Morrison government has under-promised and is now under-delivering on the rollout of the vaccine. It is a big job, it's a big logistical exercise, but Australia is behind the rest of the world, and there are seemingly a lot of teething problems. I hope the government works it out. We're behind the eight ball. We've also got problems in our region too, and I don't think we should be relying upon the Europeans to let their stocks of AstraZeneca
to Australia, and Morrison says we'll send it straight to the Pacific to upscale what's going on in the Pacific, because in the end, no one's safe until everyone's safe. The virus could get out of control, a new strain could develop. We've got to do more in our region as well as in Australia. You know, you saw those figures this week, some 17% of that first lot of tests in PNG of 55,000 people coming positive, and half women appearing to give babies at hospitals testing positive. We've got a real problem in our region, and we can't rely upon the Europeans releasing that dose, the AstraZeneca, to Australia and therefore to the Pacific. I saw Brendan Murphy with Andrew Clennell this morning kind of saying, well, it's understandable the Europeans in a way don't want to let that vaccine come to Australia because they've got people dying in hospitals. They've got a real outbreak there, and Australia doesn't. But we need to make sure we do it better here, and we need to make sure that we do it better in the Pacific and our regions. There's a big responsibility for Australia. There's lots more to do.
Well, compared to, say, Britain, I read a statistic that Britain has vaccinated more than the entire Australian population in just over 100 days. Kurt, do you think we've been too slow on the rollout here? We seem to be quite far behind the rest of the world.
I think that Australia is placed fairly uniquely in terms of the world, in terms of the number of cases of COVID here. So I think it's a different situation. But I do feel that there are a number of hiccups to the rollout in Australia. And one of the key problems that I think we're going to see is with the AstraZeneca vaccine, the number of concerns in the community which over the safety of the vaccine, which could further derail the rollout issues that Australia is having. A number of people understandably have some concerns over a drug that has been rushed through approval processes, has had limiting testing, and has been paused in the EU due to safety concerns. So I think that the government really needs to address these concerns, and not just to dismiss these concerns as unfounded anti-vax arguments, but to really boost confidence in this vaccine so that we don't have a unfortunate situation where we have a strong preference for one of these vaccines over the other, which would really derail and undermine the ability for us to roll out this vaccine.
Well, Kurt, the EU has now resumed the AstraZeneca rollout, saying that it is actually safe to proceed. But are you saying that you think that it's potentially had an impact on public confidence here already?
Well, I think that a number of people will still have concerns, even though it has been resumed in the EU. I think that's a good sign and very good sign for Australia. But I think that there are these concerns out there in the community, and the government really needs to address these in order to build confidence in the vaccine so that we can have a successful rollout process.
All right, let's move on now. There's been a lot of discussion this week about culture, gender inequality. We, of course, heard from Nicole Flint this week, the March for Justice on Monday. Ben, what more do you think needs to be done to create systemic change?
Well, this is a massive opportunity to do something in this country. We've got, by some estimates, 1.6 million cases of sexual harassment in the last year, 200,000 cases of sexual assault. only 23,000 of those going to police and only 5,000 result in a conviction. But we've got wider problems as well. We've got a wage gap in Australia, somewhere between 13 and 31% between men and women. Women retire with 28% less superannuation. We haven't even got free childcare in this country, when half the women say that's one of the reasons they're not getting into the workforce. And if we did have free childcare, we'd have if we had childcare rates and the female participation rates that come with it as Nordic countries, would also have that $48 billion boost to our economy. We have a rolling pandemic in sexual assault and sexual harassment in this country. We've got Grace Tame leading the charge for nationally consistent consent laws and more consent education in schools. There is an outcry from women demanding we do something, and it is a pivotal moment. Politics is about grabbing hold of events as they appear in front of you. And there is such momentum and such a call for change that I really think it's an opportunity if our political leaders would listen and take hold and do something about it, with all sorts of things that can be done in both in gender equality and in tackling this rolling sexual assault pandemic. The Prime Minister must lead this debate, not hope that it blows over and flows on to other issues, but in fact say this is an opportunity to do something about gender inequality, sexual assault, sexual harassment in this country.
I think, yeah, you raise an interesting point that we're at a pivotal moment in this. Kurt, given what we've seen this week, the March for Justice, a lot of rallying calls, are we seeing a movement in Australia?
I think there are a lot of very genuine and well-founded concerns, particularly as we've heard all these reports coming out of Canberra and of Parliament. And I think both sides really have a lot to answer for and a lot of steps to make in order to improve the culture, the workplace culture that they're ultimately responsible for. I think that the problem is that a lot of these calls have been used by a more radical fringe to argue for undermining our legal frameworks of the rule of law and the presumption of innocence. And we've got a situation where the government now needs to stand up and defend these foundational principles. But the problem for the government is that it's led by a Prime Minister who has suggested that cultural issues, legal rights issues, particularly freedom of speech, are not important because they don't create jobs. And now we have a situation where the Coalition needs to defend these principles strongly. We've got to remember that the Coalition does not have a very good record in defending legal rights breaches. In fact, a legal rights audit by the Institute of Public Affairs suggests that the Coalition is responsible for more than nearly 3 times the amount of legal rights breaches in legislation than the Labor Party. So what is really required here is to take these allegations seriously, to make important steps to improve the culture, but to also defend the rule of law and not just resort to defences when one of your own is facing serious allegations.
All right, well, certainly shone a light on the issue this week, that's for sure. Let's move on now to IR legislation. I mean, this has been going on for so long, Ben. Now, the federal government has abandoned the bulk of its IR bill. It failed to negotiate it through the Senate in full. Should the government now give up on workplace reform?
Well, they should give up on workplace reform that's going to cut wages. And I think this is where the ACTU got it right. They ran a very effective campaign to point out that trying to pass legislation that would essentially cut wages and put more downward pressure on wages is the last thing the economy needs at the moment. We've had warnings from the Reserve Bank Governor of Australia that this record low wage growth, the lowest sustained period of wage growth since the 30s depression, is harming our economy. And I think that's the argument that cut through in the ACTU's campaign, and in the end it affected how the Senate voted. The last thing we need to do is be putting in place industrial relations laws that cut wage and conditions. That's obviously not good for those workers who lose those wages and conditions, but it's bad for the economy overall. The big thing that we've got to get going in this country is wages growth. So we need industrial relations reform that not only protects workers and give them their rights, but leads to an increase in wages, because that's going to be good for the whole of the economy. The lowest sustained level of wage growth since the 30s. Meanwhile, of course, profits are booming. Well, we've had a 19% increase in profits. So the problem is not on the profit side, the problem is on the wages side. Now, there's nothing wrong with industrial relations reform, but there is something wrong with industrial relations reform that's going to lower wages and put downward pressure on wages when that's the last thing the economy needs.
Kurt, Labor has said it's humiliating for the government that only one of its measures from its suite of reforms managed to pass successfully. Do you agree? I mean, what is the future for these reforms?
Yeah, I think it is a failure on the government to really build a consensus, which they had high hopes of doing last year when they spoke about this. And I think that there is an important part that did pass in the bill, which was a clarification of the definition of casual work, which was an important step. But I think that the government really needs to look at ways that they can simplify the awards system to make employment opportunities more easy to come by. This is a thing that is, some larger companies can deal with stringent labour laws, but a lot of small businesses who have not received a massive jump in profits are really struggling to actually provide more job opportunities for Australians. I think that the problem the coalition faces is that they're arguing that they need IR reforms to build jobs and to increase wages, but at the same time they're pursuing policy that is going to destroy jobs, such as a net zero emission policy, which the Institute of Public Affairs has estimated could cost up to 650,000 jobs concentrated in important industries like manufacturing, mining and agriculture. We talk often about the importance of a need for high-paying and stable employment. Well, mining is the highest paid industry in Australia. Manufacturing offers well above average full-time work, and agriculture is the backbone of regional communities. So I think the coalition really needs to take a broader look at their whole policy and how they're building, creating jobs and supporting industries that employ mainstream Australians.
All right, well, another busy week. We have to leave it there. Curtly Wallace and Ben Oquist, great to chat. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks, Danica.
Thank you.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.